The day Sylvie Marchand walked into the Côte Saint-Luc Community Hall, wearing a cream-wrap dress and holding the hand of a man who was not her husband, Diana Leclerc felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She had been standing near the registration table, a glass of sparkling water in one hand and a name tag in the other. Because that was what you did at your husband's company anniversary gala. You helped. 22 years of helping. 22 years of being the quiet woman behind Étienne Leclerc, the man who built Leclerc Développement from a two-person office on Saint-Laurent into one of the most respected mid-size real estate firms in Montreal. And tonight, the night the company celebrated its 25th year in business, Diana had arrived early to fold programs and arrange seating cards, while Étienne told her he'd be there by 7. It was 7:43. Sylvie Marchand was his project coordinator. Diana knew this because Étienne had mentioned her exactly twice in passing. Once when Sylvie had apparently reorganized the filing system for the Laval project, and once when she'd brought in macarons from a new bakery on Bernard. Small, forgettable mentions, the kind you make when someone is just a coworker. Nothing more. But Sylvie was not wearing a coworker's expression as she walked through that door. She was wearing the expression of a woman who had arrived somewhere she belonged. And Étienne was 3 steps behind her, already scanning the room. Not for Diana, though Diana was standing in plain sight, but checking, in the practiced way of someone who has done this before, whether the coast was clear. Diana did not gasp. She did not drop her glass. She stood completely still, the way she had learned to stand in the years since her mother died, in the years since her father's second stroke, in the years since she discovered that stillness was not weakness, it was armor. She watched Étienne's eyes find hers across the room. She watched the color leave his face, and then she smiled, the way you smile when you are the only person in the room who already knows how this story ends. Diana Leclerc had not always been still. When she was young, 23, 24, the age of believing everything is recoverable, she had been the kind of woman who raised her voice when things were wrong. She'd grown up in Rosemont, the youngest of 3 children, in a narrow row house where opinions were expressed loudly and frequently, usually over pea soup or tourtière, and always with feeling. Her mother, Hélène, had believed that silence was complicity. Her father, Michel, had believed that a problem stated plainly was a problem half solved. Diana had believed all of this until life taught her otherwise. She had met Étienne Leclerc at a dinner party hosted by a mutual friend in Outremont. He was 31, polished, the kind of man who listened carefully and spoke precisely. He had just launched Leclerc Développement, which at the time consisted of himself, 1 contract draftsman, and an ambitious plan to develop affordable housing complexes in the East End. Diana was 28, and working as an urban planning consultant for the city. They started talking about zoning laws, and did not stop for 6 hours. She had believed in him completely, not blindly. She had seen his flaws clearly from the beginning, the way he needed to be the smartest person in the room, the way he sometimes forgot to thank the people who made his work possible. But she had believed in the core of him, in the man who, on their second date, visited a worksite at dawn because a junior contractor had called with a problem, who showed up without complaint and without fanfare, because that was what the job needed. For a long time, that man had been real. Diana gave up her city position the year their son Hugo was born, and then their daughter Camille 3 years later. She hadn't been pushed out. She'd chosen it, freely, understanding that one of them needed to be home and that her income was the smaller one. She had managed the household with the same systematic competence she'd brought to urban planning. She had hosted Étienne's client dinners. She had organized the office Christmas parties in the early years when there wasn't money for an event planner. She had proofread contracts. She had remembered the names of every employee's spouse and every client's preferred scotch. She had also quietly, over the course of 2 decades, continued to manage her own financial life. This was the part Étienne had always found slightly irritating, in the way that men sometimes find competence in their wives irritating. Not because they oppose it in principle, but because it makes them feel subtly outmaneuvered. Diana had inherited, at age 34, a substantial sum from her maternal grandmother, Mamie Réjean, a woman who had run a dry cleaning business in Hochelaga for 40 years and trusted no one with her money except herself and, eventually, Diana. The inheritance had come with a letter in Mamie Réjean's cramped cursive that said simply, "This is not the house's, not the marriage. Yours. Do something quiet with it." Diana had. She'd consulted a financial planner, a woman named Catherine, who worked out of a small office in NDG, and had the demeanor of someone who had seen everything, and together they had built a portfolio that Étienne knew existed in a general sense, and had never once asked about specifically. He had his money. Diana had hers. This had been the arrangement from the beginning, agreed upon before the wedding, documented in a marriage contract signed before a notary on Sherbrooke Ouest. The contract was a standard Quebec marriage under the séparation de biens regime. Everything each of them owned before the marriage, and everything each of them received as gift or inheritance during it, remained legally theirs alone. Étienne's company, Leclerc Développement, was his. Diana's investment portfolio, now worth considerably more than Mamie Région's original bequest, was hers. Étienne had signed this contract without much thought, 22 years ago, because at the time he had been the one with the assets and had wanted to protect them. He had not thought through the implications of that decision until much, much later. Diana had known for 7 months. She had not known the way people know things in movies, with a single dramatic revelation that reshapes everything in an instant. She had known the way women often know, in increments, in the accumulation of small wrong details that the brain registers before the heart is willing to. It started with a change in smell. Étienne had worn the same cologne for 15 years, a cedar and bergamot blend he bought at a shop on de la Montagne. One Thursday evening in October, he came home smelling of something different, light, floral, unmistakably feminine. And when she mentioned it, he said he'd stopped by a client's office, and their receptionist had been wearing heavy perfume. It was a plausible explanation. Diana had noted it and moved on. But the brain keeps files. Then there were the late nights, which were not new. Étienne had always worked late, but the texture of them changed. Previously, when he worked late, he came home tightly wound, ready to decompress over a glass of wine and talk about the project. Now he came home relaxed, almost languid, and went quickly to his home office, ostensibly to finish something. But really, Diana came to understand, to decompress from the decompression he'd already done elsewhere. By January, she was certain. She simply did not yet know who. She found out on a Tuesday afternoon in February, when she went to the Leclerc Développement offices on McGill College to drop off a flash drive of archival photos Étienne needed for a presentation. His assistant wasn't at her desk. Diana walked down the hall, knocked on his office door, heard voices inside, and opened the door. Étienne was standing at his desk. Sylvie Marchand was seated on the other side, a laptop open between them. But they had not been looking at the laptop. The silence in the room lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then Étienne said, "Diana," in a voice stripped of everything. Diana looked at him. She looked at Sylvie. She set the flash drive on the nearest surface, a shelf near the door, next to a model of a building she had attended the groundbreaking for, and she said, "I'll leave this here," and she left. She drove home. She sat in the kitchen. She made herself a cup of tea, and then she called Catherine, her financial planner. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet, not that day. Catherine first, because there were things that needed to be understood clearly before anything else happened. Because Diana was the child of a father who had been a mechanical engineer, and a mother who had been a tax accountant. And she knew, with the certainty of someone raised among people who thought in systems, that the first thing you do when a structure begins to fail is understand exactly what you're working with. Catherine was calm, practical, and thorough. She went through everything with Diana over 3 meetings. The portfolio solid, performing well, protected under the marriage contract, entirely Diana's. A commercial property Diana had purchased in her own name 8 years ago, using funds from a separate inheritance from an uncle. Also hers, also protected. A small but not insignificant interest in a tech startup that had recently attracted serious investment interest. Diana had gotten in early, at Catherine's recommendation 4 years ago. Also hers. "He can't touch any of this," Catherine said, not as reassurance but as simple fact. "I know," Diana said. "I need to know what he thinks he can touch." Catherine looked at her steadily. "What are you planning?" Diana wrapped both hands around her mug. "Nothing dramatic," she said. "I'm just going to wait." The waiting was not passive. This is a distinction that matters. Diana continued to manage the household, to attend the school events for Camille. Hugo was now 20, and at McGill, relatively independent, to host the dinners, to be present. She consulted a divorce lawyer in March, a quiet and methodical man named Bernard, who worked out of a heritage building in Old Montreal. Bernard confirmed everything Catherine had told her. Under Quebec's séparation de biens regime, her assets were hers. Full stop. What was at issue in any separation proceeding would be the matrimonial family home, which they owned jointly, and questions of support. Nothing more. He may expect more, Bernard said. He might, Diana agreed. But expectation isn't entitlement. She said nothing to Étienne. He did not bring up what she had seen in February. Neither did she. They continued to share a house, to share meals, to share the ordinary logistics of a long marriage. And if there was a new quality of distance between them, a kind of formal politeness that had replaced warmth, Étienne appeared to interpret it as Diana processing something, cooling down, moving toward acceptance. He was not entirely wrong. She was processing, but she was not moving toward acceptance. She was moving toward clarity. In April, she spoke with Hugo. Carefully, without specifics, she explained that she and his father had been having difficulties, and that a separation might happen eventually. Hugo was quiet for a long time, and then said, "Is it because of someone else?" And Diana said, "That's something you'll have to ask your father." And Hugo said, "I don't need to," which told Diana that she was not the only one who had been paying attention. Camille was harder. Camille was 17, emotionally perceptive in the way of people who have grown up watching adults carefully. And she adored Étienne in the way that daughters sometimes adore fathers, who are charismatic and intermittently present. Not the constancy of love, but the intensity of it. Diana was gentle. She was careful. She said nothing that would poison Camille against her father, because that was not what Camille needed, and it was not who Diana was. But she told Camille the truth when Camille asked if something was wrong. And she told her that whatever happened, it would be handled properly. "By you?" Camille asked. "By me," Diana said. The gala was Étienne's idea. 25 years of Leclerc développement deserved celebration, he had said. And Diana, who had been woven into the fabric of that company from its earliest years, had agreed to help organize it. She had booked the Côte Saint-Luc hall. She had coordinated with the caterer and the florist. She had compiled the guest list. She had arranged the tribute video featuring archival photos, some of which came from her own albums, from the early years when she and Étienne had worked side by side. And she had been, in every meaningful sense, half of what he'd built. She had done all of this knowing what she knew. She had done it because walking away from something before the right moment was a form of waste, and Diana had never been wasteful. And she had done it, if she was being honest, because she wanted to be in the room. She wanted to see what Étienne would do with the gift of her patience. She wanted to know whether he would use these months to come to her, to admit what had happened, to begin the hard and genuine process of figuring out what their life would look like now, or whether he would take her silence for permission and keep going. She had her answer the moment Sylvie Marchand walked through the door in that cream dress, with that expression, and Étienne 3 steps behind her. He had taken her silence for permission. So be it. Diana set her name tag down on the registration table and walked across the room. She did not walk fast. She did not set her jaw or clench her hands. She walked the way she had walked into difficult rooms her entire life, with her shoulders back and her face composed and her mind already 3 steps ahead of the moment. Étienne met her halfway, which she noted. At least he had the decency to come toward her rather than wait to be approached. "Diana," he said low, "I can explain." "There's nothing to explain tonight," Diana said pleasantly, as if they were discussing the seating arrangement. "You're the guest of honor. I have work to do." She turned to Sylvie. "I don't believe we've met properly," she said. "I'm Diana Leclerc. Welcome." Sylvie's expression shifted in 3 distinct stages: surprise, discomfort, then a guarded kind of relief, as if she'd braced for something explosive and was recalibrating. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was younger than Diana had expected. Diana noted this with something that was not quite pity but was adjacent to it. Sylvie was perhaps 32. She was not a villain in this story, not exactly. Just a person who had made choices without fully understanding the architecture of what she was stepping into. Diana excused herself and went back to work. She greeted guests. She confirmed the audiovisual setup with the technician. She made sure the dietary restrictions were correctly assigned to the right place settings. She introduced Étienne's longest-serving employees to the newer ones, told the story of the company's early days to a group of younger staff who had not yet heard it, and smiled until her cheeks ached. Étienne watched her from across the room all evening, with the expression of a man beginning to realize that he has misread something fundamental. 3 weeks after the gala, Étienne came to her. It was a Sunday morning, the house quiet. Camille at a friend's place. He found Diana in the kitchen, reading, a coffee going cold beside her, and he sat down across from her and said, "I think we need to talk about what's happening." "All right," Diana said, closing her book. I know things haven't been right between us." He paused. I haven't handled things well. This was the closest thing to an apology she would get. She understood. Étienne was not a man who found accountability easy. The admission that things had not been handled well was, for him, substantial. She waited. I think, he said slowly, we should talk about the practical side of things. If this is where we're going. He cleared his throat. I want to make sure we do this fairly. I agree, Diana said. The house, obviously, we'd need to deal with. He was choosing his words carefully. And the business, you've been involved, in a way, over the years. And your portfolio, I assume we'd look at all of that together. Diana set her coffee cup down. Étienne, she said, do you remember the marriage contract we signed? A pause. Of course. Then you remember that we married under séparation de biens. A longer pause. The company is yours, Diana said. I have no claim on Leclerc, Développement. I never did. She watched something ease slightly in his face. My portfolio is mine. You have no claim on it. It never was and isn't now part of any marital estate. The easing stopped. Your portfolio, he repeated. Yes. Diana, that portfolio has grown significantly over the years. Some of that growth was during our marriage. Under séparation de biens, Diana said. Property and its growth belongs to the owner. There's no community property. There's no sharing of appreciation. What's mine is mine. What's yours is yours. Bernard confirmed this. You can have your own lawyer confirm it as well, which I'd recommend. The name landed. Étienne's eyes sharpened. You've already spoken to a lawyer. In March, Diana said. A long silence. The property on Wellington, he said. The commercial unit. In my name alone, Diana said. Purchased with funds inherited from my uncle. Protected. The startup. Mine. He sat back. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a snowplow moved down the street, even in May. Montreal's relationship with winter was complicated, and the sound of it filled the room for a moment before fading. I didn't realize, Étienne said, and she could hear in his voice the exact quality of a man who had spent 22 years not realizing, who had built an assumption about his wife's assets, the way people build assumptions about quiet things, by not thinking about them too hard. I know, Diana said, and she was neither cruel about it nor kind. She was simply accurate. The divorce proceedings were not simple, because nothing involving 2 decades of shared life ever is. There were disagreements about the family home, a Victorian semi in Westmount that they'd renovated twice, and that Camille had grown up in. There were questions about support. There were difficult conversations about Hugo and Camille that required both of them to be, temporarily, better than they felt. But the financial architecture was clear. Diana's assets were Diana's. The contract signed before a notary 22 years ago, signed as it happened, largely to protect Étienne's nascent company, had protected her instead. The irony of this was not lost on either of them, though it was only Diana who understood it completely, because she had had 7 months to sit with it. Étienne's lawyer confirmed what Bernard had said. He found a second opinion, because he was a man who found first opinions unsatisfying when they went against him. The second opinion said the same thing. Eventually, he stopped looking for a third. What they divided was the house. Diana kept it. Étienne received a payment representing his share of the equity, which was considerable, and which he accepted because the alternative, a protracted legal fight over an outcome that would not change, served no one. They agreed on a support arrangement for Camille's remaining years at home. Hugo, who was adult and employed part-time and thoroughly disillusioned with his father, required no arrangement. The paperwork was finalized on a Wednesday afternoon in late November. Diana and Bernard sat in his quiet office in Old Montreal as the last signatures were applied. And then Bernard shook her hand and said, "That was well handled." Diana thanked him and went home. The house felt different that evening. Not lighter, exactly. More like a room after furniture has been rearranged, where your eye keeps catching the absence of things that used to be there. Étienne's coat hooks were empty. His running shoes were gone from the mat near the back door. The corner of the kitchen counter where he'd kept his keys and his phone and his perpetual coffee mug was bare. Camille was home. She'd taken to being home more lately, with the particular teenage instinct for sensing when a parent needs quiet company. She came downstairs in her socks and made herself a bowl of cereal and sat across from Diana at the kitchen table without asking for anything. And they sat together in the comfortable kind of silence that Diana had always thought was the truest measure of a relationship. Whether you could share a room without filling it. After a while, Camille said, "Is it done?" "It's done," Diana said. Camille nodded. She ate her cereal. "Outside. It had started to snow. Properly, this time, not the freak May plow. The first real snowfall of the winter. It caught in the kitchen window light and fell steadily. "Are you okay?" Camille asked. Diana thought about this seriously. The way she thought about everything seriously. The way her mother had taught her to treat questions as if they deserved real answers. "I will be," she said. Camille looked at her for a long moment. "I think you were always going to be okay," she said. "I think you knew that already." Diana looked at her daughter, this sharp-eyed, careful person she had raised, and felt something that was not pride exactly, but was made of similar material. "Maybe," Diana said. She called Catherine the next morning. "It's done," she said when Catherine picked up. "How are you?" "Good," Diana said. Genuinely. She paused. "I want to talk about the startup. I've been watching the last quarter. I think it's time to increase the position." Catherine laughed. The short, pleased laugh of someone who had worked with Diana long enough to know that this was how she marked transitions. Not with ceremonies, but with the next decision, the next step, the quiet work of building something. "Send me the numbers you've been looking at," Catherine said. "I'll send them this afternoon," Diana said. She poured her coffee. The snow from the night before had settled on the garden, on the fence line, on the branches of the old maple her father had helped her plant the spring she and Étienne had moved in. It was still there, the maple, massive now, taking up half the yard, exactly where it was supposed to be. The house was hers. The maple was hers. Everything she had built quietly, over years, in the deliberate and unhurried way of someone who understood that the most durable things are not the ones that announce themselves. All of it was hers. She drank her coffee. She pulled up her laptop. She started sending Catherine the numbers.